Let's make one pan seitan, a super low-fat seitan recipe.
With improved texture.
All right, since this is a seitan recipe, we need Vital Wheat gluten. We use Anthony's because it seems to be reasonably priced, and it's not that hard to get on Amazon.
It's non-GMO too.
And how much Vital Wheat gluten do I need?
Full cup.
All right, I keep a measuring cup just in here because, you know, I use it often enough. So 1 cup. All right, what's next?
Now we're going to be adding our seasoning. First up is 2 teaspoons of a vegan chicken flavored consomme.
Yeah, it's like a vegan chicken broth. There's no animal stuff in it, but it is like a broth. Bouillon, that's the word. It's a bouillon.
It's a bouillon. Now, our favorite combo, 1 teaspoon garlic powder and 1 teaspoon onion powder.
It's Florida. Humidity, you know?
1 tablespoon nutritional yeast for that yummy umami taste. Speaking of umami, let's punch it up a bit with 1 teaspoon of yeast extract. You can also use white miso.
This is just a yeast extract that we got on Amazon. You can use white miso, you can use mushroom powder. There's all different things that you can use for this. If you really can't get any of those things, just use another tablespoon of nutritional yeast. This stuff gets sticky. Wow.
Well, you know, we had a
little bit of a storm.
Hurricane come through, so we got some humidity issues. All right.
And what is this?
Now, for our secret ingredient, potato flakes. We're doing 3 tablespoons.
These are the Bob's Red Mill version. They are actually considered a whole food because all they are is dehydrated potatoes. There's nothing else in them. And what I want to do now is just give this a good mix. I want to make sure it's just evenly distributed throughout.
And you might want to mix it a little bit more than you would normally for your dry ingredients because that consomme,
it tends to make little balls.
It likes to get clumpy.
Yeah, I don't like that, but the flavor is fantastic though. All right, I think we're mixed. Now what?
Now we're going to mix up our wet ingredients, which are super complicated.
Okay, are you ready for this?
1 cup of water and 1 tablespoon of white wine vinegar.
Some people have asked if you could use apple cider vinegar. Yes, you can. It's going to alter the flavor just ever so slightly. The vinegar is not really there for flavor. It's there to kind of combat the Vital Wheat gluten-esque flavor that comes through in seitan sometimes. If you only have the seitan, if you put a sauce or something on it, it's almost, I leave it out half the time.
Yeah.
You can reduce the amount of vinegar if you want to. I don't know that I would use more, and apple cider vinegar is a stronger flavor of vinegar, so be careful if you use that. I have here 1 cup plus 1 tablespoon. I'm only going to put in half. Why am I only putting in half?
Because hydration levels can vary.
Yes.
Particularly since we're not weighing our dry ingredients, we're just using volumes. So that can change things up a bit.
And I usually weigh things in recipes when I'm doing something that's like a bake. But in this recipe, it's actually quite forgiving, so I'm not as worried about it. And I want this to be super easy to do, really obtainable for almost anybody to do. I actually do this by eye for measurement probably 90% of the time when I do it. I had to actually think about the measurements to write them down so that we can show you in a video. But the real reason why I only put in half is because if I put in too much, I can't take it back out. But if I don't put in enough, I can always add a little bit more. It's starting to come together pretty good.
Even at this point, without it being thoroughly mixed, you can start to see those gluten strands forming. And that's super important to get a texture that we're looking for. But wait, there's more to add even more texture.
I call this Seitan 2.0, 1-pan seitan, whatever you want to call it. I've started doing it this way, and I love it. There's a couple little tricks along the way that really help, and they're simple. They're nothing super fancy, just little things. And I'm just adding a little bit at a time and going by feel. Somebody asked me recently how I know when it's ready. Well, after you've made a few, you kind of get a feel for it. You want it to feel moist and pliable, and you don't want any dry spots. Like right now, that's looking about the way I want it to be. So we're going to take this to the side. Notice I didn't use all the water.
Just a little bit left.
Yeah,
like 1/4 of a cup, maybe, if that.
Sticking my hand in there and just getting it all coated, basically. And I want to scrape the sides down with it. Right now, it's wet. It feels moist. And see those little yellow balls? That's the
consomme.
That's the consomme. It does kind of all work out when it cooks, but it's just one of those, like, it bothers me to see it, you know? You gotta squeeze them and put it back in there. But anyway, at a certain point, you realize this isn't working in the bowl. So get all of it off the sides of the bowl. put it out on your board. And now we want to give this a knead. See, little pieces are coming off. We don't want that. I want to give it a bit of a knead. Not too harsh, just bringing it together, mostly.
Now, even though it is super moist, it'll already be kind of tight.
Yeah, it's already got some good structure going. What we're doing now is just getting the gluten going in it, just activating that gluten. And I'll do it in my hands too. You can tell if the gluten is forming by doing this. When you start to see like that skin, that smooth area, that's when you know you've got pretty decent formation.
It's kind of a squeeze and inverted pole type thing.
Vital wheat gluten does not need as much kneading as some people like to think. It pretty much forms gluten very, very quickly. What I'm doing now is I'm forming it into sort of a...
log.
Yeah, a log, for lack of a better word. For reasons. They're coming. Okay, something like that. I want it to be maybe 8 inches long or so, and roughly squarish in shape like this.
Rectangular.
Rectangular. Yeah, that's the word. And I'm trying to force it together so that it's one mass in that size and be a little bit on the flat side. And now I need a knife. Okay, I noticed this one piece wasn't quite together the way I want it, and in a minute that'll be a problem. So if you see anything like that, just kind of press it together. This stuff comes back together super easy.
If you played with Play-Doh as a child...
yeah, this will come natural.
Now is the time for all those tools to come into play.
Let your inner Play-Doh child come out. You can smack it around a little, it's okay, doesn't mind. Now, I want to choose a side that I'm going to keep solid. I'm just going to go with this side. So what I'm going to do is just like maybe 2 fingers. Don't cut your fingers. Just give it a 2 fingers gap, and I'm going to cut straight across, making one long piece, right? And then I'm going to find the other part, about 2 fingers, and cut across again and separate those.
What you're looking for is 3 equal in dignity pieces.
Roughly, yeah. And what we're going to do is we're going to braid them together. And for those of you that don't know how to braid, it's really simple. You take this piece, you put it over the middle, then you take the end and you put that over the middle, and you just keep alternating that from the ends, just like that. And when you get to the end, remember the press together trick like we did? Press it together really firmly, roll it under. And there we have our seitan ready to cook.
If you've ever made a braided loaf, it looks sort of like this.
Okay, over at the stove, I have my cast iron pan on about 6 out of 10, and it's heating up really, really nice. It should get to about 400 to 425 degrees. There is no oil in this pan. Did I mention this is a no oil method? I probably didn't, but it is. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take that seitan, we're gonna put it right in the middle of that pan, and then grab a burger press. If you don't have a burger press, use another heavy cast iron pan. I have a burger press, so that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to set it right on top. You should hear a lot of sizzle at this point. And I want to push down slightly. I'm not applying a lot of weight, just a little bit of pressure. What that does is it helps to sear the outsides of that seitan and keeps it from rising up. That's the improved texture that Derica mentioned earlier. Now the real trick here is you want to make sure that your pan was preheated, and I use cast iron for this for reasons that will soon become apparent. But basically cast iron holds the heat a lot better, and it doesn't provide thermal shock when you do the next step that I'll show in a minute. If your burger press gets too moist on the underside, you can always just wipe it off. It's no big deal. What I like to do though is after about a minute or so, I get out a metal spatula and I just start scraping around underside. See how it doesn't even stick to it? Just comes right off. Oh, we had a little tiny bit stick. Look at that. Just stick it on top, it's fine. And then flip it over, and look at that nice brown color. We actually want it to get darker than that, but that crust there will not stick to the burger press, so we can do side 2. Now, a word about pressing. You don't want to press it too much, because then you'll just make it one mass. All that braiding that we did will get lost. But just a little bit of press to keep it from expanding. As seitan cooks, it likes to expand, so it becomes bready. This is where a lot of people have had problems making seitan or enjoying seitan, is simply because of that. I usually end up flipping it a couple of times. I don't really have a time that's specific. What I look for is doneness. When it starts to show like a dark brown, almost burnt, but not quite burned, you definitely don't want to burn it. Once it gets to a nice dark deep brown, that's when it's done. It's not quite there. See, this side is a little bit more done than this side. Gotta watch your pan. If your pan is not heating up evenly, move it around a little bit on the burner to make sure it heats up evenly. If you have a gas stove, this is gonna be so much easier. For a nice rough idea though, usually 3 to 4 minutes per side, if your pan is heated enough, is usually about right to totally cook both sides of this. While this is cooking, I like to heat up some water in a kettle. It doesn't have to be boiling, but pretty warm makes this a lot faster. Okay, I think we're getting pretty close. I moved it over in the pan so that the center part hits that part that wasn't cooking properly. There we go. See that nice dark brown? That's the color I really want it to be. So just another minute on this side. Okay, so it's probably been close to 6 to 8 minutes or so altogether. We have a nice brown on this side. Now let's flip it one more time. When I lift this up though, look at that pan. There's almost nothing in that pan. That's the important aspect here. There we go. We got the nice brown color. Sometimes it doesn't go all the way to the edges and it's okay. The trick here is make sure it's not stuck to the pan at all. And then remember that water I talked about? This is why you want to use a cast iron pan. Most pans, if you use like an aluminum pan or something, you could crack the pan or warp the pan by doing this. But with cast iron, it's not as big of a deal. And I'm just going to put it to pretty much just over the top of that seitan. It's gonna bubble up and get all nasty on you, but don't worry about it, it's okay. Okay, make sure it's not stuck to the bottom yet again. And then I wanna add a little seasoning to this water. I'm just gonna be using Kirkland Organic No Salt Seasoning this time, but you can use pretty much whatever you want. You can use more of the consomme, salt and pepper if you want. You can even just leave it. You can use veggie broth instead of water, whichever way you wanna go. This stuff has a little bit of a spice to it. I tend to like it. It works nicely. And now we let this simmer for 30 minutes. And when I say simmer, do you see how it's just barely boiling? That's about what we want. I'm actually gonna turn my heat down just slightly because I know on my stove, 5 is pretty much where I want it to be. I do feel like there's not quite enough water in there, so I'm gonna give it a little bit more. The seitan does float a bit. We wanna make sure that it's really braising well in there. Yep, see it's just barely covered. That's perfect. Make sure nothing's sticking. And we just want that bare bubble, just a little bit here and there. If it's bubbling too much, that's how bready textures get formed. If it's not bubbling enough, it'll take a really, really long time to cook. But just like this should be perfect. So we're about halfway through the simmer, and what I want to do now is just kind of flip this over and do it very carefully because it'll splash, but get under one side and give it a flip, slide it down. And it's really hot too. Just let it sit like that for the rest of the 15 minutes. That way, both sides make sure that they get braised up pretty good. Okay, our time is up. Turn off the stove. I'm gonna get a plate ready here and grab our seitan and put it onto a plate. Look at that. Okay, the seitan is done. Now at this point, if you were to cover this and put it in your fridge for even just a few hours, but overnight is better, the texture would get just a little bit firmer. However, I didn't prepare one ahead, so we're just gonna use this one, and it's gonna be great anyway. But right now,
Brian doesn't have much patience,
no.
we tend to eat it this way more than the day ahead.
Yeah.
It's only if we have leftovers or something that we didn't need that it accidentally gets that prepared ahead type of scenario. But let's look into this right now, shall we?
And now it's time for my favorite part of every cooking video where we get to eat what we made. And this, we have a couple pieces here that we did in the, intro. Let's just say intro because it's much nicer than what we actually call it off camera. So we're just gonna have a little taste of this. And now, like we said, the texture does improve if it sits overnight, but this is actually pretty good as is. The middle is gonna be a little bit better than the ends just because of the way things cook.
This particular method of cooking seitan is my favorite because it creates more strands and more texture in the middle. If you don't go through these different processes, the braiding and the pressing, then you're not going to get as much texture in the center, and I don't care for it as much. The flavor will be the same regardless, but that texture is a big part of your enjoyment of food.
I got something to show you. Speaking of texture, if you look, the braiding did this thing to it. If I start to pull, see how it's kind of coming apart? Like there's different discrete sections here. That is what the braiding does. It creates that terrible texture. Get it? Terrible texture. But that's exactly what that does, and that's why we do that. It's just awesome. You can use this any way that you would have used animal products in the past, okay? This is very, very versatile. We've used it to make pork. We've used it to make like a chicken substitute. This is going to taste sort of like a chicken/pork. Tonight, we're actually going to be making Philly cheesesteaks with this. We're just going to grill up some onions and some peppers and some mushrooms, and I have a cheese sauce that we're going to go on, put it on a roll, and good to go. But I'm eating this.
Anyways, if you like the flavor of seitan, but the texture was just a little bit off, and you're lazy like us and you want it right away, make this.
And you want to do it in one pot or one pan without making too much of a mess. You want it in under an hour, and you want it to be low fat. This is like the best you can get. So anyway, as always, guys, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time on
The Bistro.